Dear listener, before the story begins, I ask you to subscribe to my channel. This is the best motivation at the start. And we are starting. Hey everyone, I'm new to this forum and wanted to share my experience, as I know many of you can relate to what I've been through. I'm a 33-year-old man, and my spouse is a 36-year-old woman. I'll try to keep this as concise as possible. Over the summer, I noticed my wife was incredibly stressed due to her job. She had recently been promoted and taken on significantly more responsibilities at work. I understood when she came home tired or woke up irritable, and I didn't take it personally. I was happy to listen to her vent and tried to be as supportive as possible. She also worked night shifts, so she never got enough sleep, and often picked up extra hours to assist her boss. During this period, we had some intense arguments, which she initiated. I couldn't comprehend why she was lashing out at me and attributed it to stress and hormones. Looking back, I suspect this is when she started getting close to a colleague at work. By October, my wife was working constantly, and I noticed she was putting more effort into her appearance before going to work. I took note but assumed she was adjusting her style to match her new position. I believe this is when she decided to physically cheat with the other man. We were hardly spending any time together, and she seemed utterly uninterested in anything I was doing. She became more distant from me, no longer sharing details about her work life as she used to. Our conversations were minimal. She would simply go to work, come home, sleep, and repeat the cycle. One evening, after returning from touring a potential school for her daughter, we had another disagreement. She hadn't informed me that she was going to work that night, and I was looking forward to spending time with her. That same night, after the argument, I felt something was amiss, and directly asked her if there was someone else, which she adamantly denied, calling me insane and absurd. A week or two later, I attached an AirTag under her car. Her behavior became increasingly disrespectful and erratic, and she started hanging out with some girls against my wishes. Another fight ensued, and she left the house, saying she was calling in sick to work. It turned out she went to some guy's apartment and spent the night there. After 12 years and 2 children together, her justification was that she wanted attention. I was stunned. She had apparently been talking to him for months, claiming she could open up to him and confide in him without feeling judged, which apparently led her to decide to sleep with him. We've tried everything: therapy, heartfelt conversations, and countless discussions. Months later, she is still in contact with him. Our relationship is essentially over. I am genuinely traumatized by the betrayal and deceit. It's difficult to comprehend how someone you would sacrifice your life for can break your heart so ruthlessly. I've been contemplating sharing this story for a while, and based on the title, you can probably guess that it happened almost 3 years ago. However, I feel it's time to get this off my chest. At the time, I, 30M, was happily married to my 30-year-old wife, whom I'll call Sarah, not her real name. We had been married for about 6 years. We traveled, ate together, and spent time with each other nearly every night during the first 6 years of our marriage. In 2019, I began to notice some red flags that, looking back, should have indicated something was amiss. Early that year, I had to attend an out-of-town work conference, the first time I'd ever been away overnight without her. She immediately proposed that her friend, 29M, whom I'll call Mark, might visit and even stay over during those days. For context, Mark is someone she texted constantly. They were close friends, and I know they had been intimate before we met. I objected, pointing out that he had never come over in 6 years, except for the one time I was absent. Although she was upset, she respected my wishes as far as I know, based on the security camera footage. There were other things that gave me pause, but for the sake of brevity, I'll move on. Fast forward to the end of 2019. While we were in a movie theater together, I noticed her sending messages to someone on her Apple Watch during the film. This was very uncharacteristic of her, and the messages, though I can't recall them exactly, were a bit intense for a coworker at a new job, but not overtly sexual or romantic. I asked her about it after the movie, but she dismissed it. Her behavior changed, sitting away from me on the couch, changing in a different room, and so on. I started to wonder if I was being cheated on, or if something was being hidden from me. I felt immense guilt for even considering checking her phone for confirmation, feeling that if I did and was wrong, there would be no point in continuing the marriage. After contemplating it for days, I decided to check in January 2020. Her phone was always nearby and I didn't know the passcode. Fortunately, her watch was accessible, and she had set the code to our anniversary. The irony. What I discovered next was horrifying. Sarah and Mark were discussing her hookups with a coworker, mocking me for not noticing what was going on, and Sarah expressing how the idea of me touching her was revolting and how she couldn't imagine having kids with me. We had been trying in mid-2019, so this was especially hurtful. Then I read the messages between Sarah and the coworker, whom I'll call Carl. Those messages were explicit, and Sarah showed more affection for him in every way than she did for me at that point. Each message revealed a new, increasingly painful revelation. A trip she claimed was to console a friend was actually so that the friend could meet Carl. She started changing in the bathroom to hide the hickeys on her body. Her therapist knew about all of this and said I should be made aware, but that she should be happy with whoever. I stayed up until 3 or 4 a.m., reading these messages and taking pictures of everything. I didn't sleep that night. My jaw clenched so hard it caused issues for months. She left for work, I was off that day, and my first call was to a lawyer. What were my options? When I confronted her, what could I legally say or not say? I waited for her to come home, rereading the messages to confirm it wasn't the worst nightmare I'd ever had. When I confronted her, I told her what I knew without revealing I had been in her texts. I told her I had seen the hickey, a lie, but she had mentioned it in the messages, and that I knew she was texting someone. Sarah lied and tried to argue that someone else had given her the hickey, but finally, I read a message from her watch. I suppose I expected her to break down and admit everything. Instead, Sarah exploded in rage, accusing me of violating her privacy. The insanity and gaslighting of trying to convince me that I was the one in the wrong here was astonishing. She stormed out of the house and disappeared for 3 days. No communication about where she was, even though I asked her to tell me where she was staying so I knew she'd be safe. To this day, I only know a small part of where she went or what she did. When she returned, she said she wanted to try to fix things and spend some time together. It didn't go well. I caught her sneaking off to meet with him again, as she foolishly left the watch behind, and I could read the messages in real time. In February 2020, I finally told her I had contacted a lawyer. She insisted she wouldn't sign anything until we attended couples counseling. I went along with it, but it went off the rails immediately when, after I explained we were there because she had an affair, she argued that my word choice was too strong. She also lied about the fact that she had cheated on me before Carl with a married man, something I discovered later while going through her watch again. She admitted her plan was to find an apartment and then hand me papers without me ever knowing what was going on. She even tried to blame the entire affair on me, using, in the therapist's view, minor disagreements as proof of my cold and uncaring demeanor. For example, I didn't immediately yell at my parents for a Christmas gift she didn't like, or at her parents when they playfully teased her. At this point, I knew I needed to divorce her, as she would never tell the truth. We agreed that Sarah would move out of our house, and I even helped her find an apartment. Anything to get her out faster. One day in March 2020, I watched the news of COVID come in, and all construction work stopped. Her apartment was almost ready but was being renovated. Now there was nowhere for her to go. I was stuck in the house with her from March to June 2020. For those wondering, she had enough legal knowledge to know that leaving would make her case harder and might still require her to pay expenses. Those 3 or so months were hell. Trying to do my job and live in a house with the person who had wronged me and ridiculed me was unbearable at times. We tried, as best we could, to keep it civil and not scream at each other every time we passed each other. Imagine spending 90+ days cooking meals, passing by, and seeing no one else in the world but the person who ended your marriage and broke your heart. Every day, I essentially locked myself in a room for 8 hours, then did yard work or worked out to avoid speaking with her. She moved out for the most part in late June once the world started to open up a bit and had all of her items out by July. Knowing that I wanted the house, she definitely manipulated the situation to her advantage to avoid being publicly shamed. Her family, to this day, doesn't know what caused the divorce. She didn't tell them the divorce was happening at all until after the papers were signed, and essentially forced me to pretend we were still together until then, at which point I told her to tell her parents, or I would. They never asked me what the cause was, although 1 or 2 did wish me well. I never felt the need to tell them, as despite the pain and gaslighting she caused, I didn't feel the need to hurt them. Her parents never wronged me. Carl and Sarah didn't last. When I found out, Carl told her to leave me and be with him. But she tried to mend our relationship, and he walked away from her, so she ended up with no one. Sarah and I rarely speak now unless it's absolutely necessary, which is rare. I've wondered at times if maybe I was wrong for not publicly outing her infidelity. The people who are important to me know the truth. I also never confronted or spoke to Carl, Mark, or her friend, who knew about all of this, but never warned me. As for me, I found someone who is truly a good person and have a great relationship. I've never told Sarah, as it's none of her business. Much like telling her family about her cheating, I thought about telling Sarah how well I'm doing, but I think that is just schadenfreude. Thanks for reading, and I'd love to hear your thoughts.